Okay, so my Facebook profile is on Lauretta Bender. She was in the field of child neuropsychiatry as well as medicine and medical field in general. She wasn't directly trained as a psychologist, but her work is considered psychology today. Her relationship status is single. She went through two husbands, but both unexpectedly died, which was tough on her. She was born August 9th, 1897, and died January 4th, 1987. And she was born in Butte, Montana. Growing up there, she struggled in school. She had dyslexia, which no one really knew at the time. But after her parents got through it with her, she was focused on helping children with developmental disabilities and things along those lines. So, moving on to her wall, her first post is from May 10th, 1926, where she finally received her MD from the University of Iowa. Prior to this, she got her BA and her MA at the University of Chicago. And after getting her degree at Iowa, she ended up internshipping and working at many hospitals. And this was huge because it was mainly the start of her medical career, where she'd be for the rest of her life. So, moving up March 3rd, 1934, after 4 years of working at Bellevue Hospital, I was just named the senior psychiatrist within the children's psychiatric division. She followed her husband at the time to New York, where she started working at Bellevue. And she worked with children there, especially those that were abandoned, suffering from trauma, as well as childhood schizophrenia, which we would consider autism today. And she basically diagnosed these disorders, worked with patients to develop treatments, and also did clinical testing, which we would kind of frown upon today. She did things like administering drugs to patients as well as ECT, things that are sort of frowned upon in today's day and age. So, April 10th, 1938, childhood schizophrenia is a real issue, and the Bender Gestalt test can be a great help during treatment. So, to look at these intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, she developed the Bender Gestalt test. This is where individuals were shown nine index cards. Each index card had a geometric design on them, and patients had to copy the design on the card before the next card was pulled out. And at the end, they'd look at the designs and grade them on accuracy and organization. And this was used to look at visual motor functioning, any sort of developmental issues, as well as neurological impairments in mostly children, but also sometimes adults. And these were based off the work of Max Wertheimer, who was a well known Gestalt psychologist that I'll get into later. So, moving up, August 10th, 1942. Childhood schizophrenia is a definite syndrome, and people need to know. What she's referring to here is autism as we know it today. At this time, though, autism spectrum was classified under the umbrella of childhood schizophrenia, but she started to notice patterns and started to think that there was a disorder of its own within this. She started noticing maturation issues, developmental issues, and started to think it was its own specific thing. And this was huge because her work started to put autism on the map, even though it wasn't under the same name. And it definitely helped expand research on the field and the disorder as well. So, moving up, while upbringing and bad behavior can explain some behaviors, neurological issues are the real culprit. So, the attitude at this time was that bad parenting and inherently bad children were the reason that behavioral problems existed in kids. She took a strong stance and said that neurological issues were the real culprit. She was really the first one to do this at the time, and this was huge because this is a long standing belief today. It's not just bad parenting, and it's not just bad kids. There's a lot of other things that go into it, especially neurological issues. And moving up in September 2nd, 1955, she's fed up with the racist behavior of this country. Loretta Bender is well known to be very anti racism. During her time at Bellevue, she worked with all sorts of patients, and a lot of them were African American. At this time, a lot of people believed that there was differences in cognitive ability between white Americans and African Americans, and that the levels of mental functioning were much lower for African Americans compared to whites. She ran all sorts of tests and did all sorts of studies to prove this wrong, and she did find that there were no differences in cognitive ability. And along with this, she didn't use the word primitive for African Americans, which was common at this time in the medical field. She used the word civilized as they would use for any white patient. and she basically just found that race wasn't a factor in anything. So moving to her friends, she didn't really have many. I couldn't find much, so I got some together. Her first friend is Paul Schildner, who was her most recent late husband. He was a psychoanalyst who worked in Vienna the same time as Freud, and they worked together doing tons of research. And she followed him to New York, where she started her career at Bellevue Hospital. Her next friend is Stella Chess, who is a childhood psychologist at the same time as Lauretta Bender. They actually worked together at Bellevue Hospital and did research together. And Stella's work focused on autistic children and children with temperament issues. And her last friend is Max Wertheimer, who was one of the founders of Gestalt psychology. A lot of Loretta's work was based off of his, especially the Bender Gestalt test, which was directly based off of his work. And that's it on Loretta Bender. Thank you.